Imagine waking up one morning and finding out that one decision in Washington has just erased a chunk of Donald Trump's power over Canada, opened the door to tens of billions in tariff refunds, and forced every politician on both sides of the border to rewrite their game plan overnight. That's what's hanging over Tariff Judgment Day. Right now, the U.S. Supreme Court is sitting on a case that could decide whether Trump's entire emergency tariff machine, the thing he's using to hammer Canada, Mexico, China, and others, is actually legal, or whether it gets shut down and thrown in the constitutional trash can. And quietly in the background, you've got companies like Costco sprinting into court to say, if Trump loses, we want our money back. Tonight on Huge Press Room, we're going to unpack what this Supreme Court case is really about, how it could erase Trump's Canada tariffs, why Costco and other giants just launched a lawsuit wave, and the three very different futures Canada could wake up to when the ruling drops. You're watching Huge Press Room. If you want to stay ahead of Trump versus Canada, tariffs, trade wars, and the power games behind the headlines, hit subscribe, drop a like, and let's get into it. Let's rewind to where this all started. On February 1st, 2025, Donald Trump signs a set of executive orders and officially launches what Reuters called a sweeping trade war against Canada, Mexico, and China. The basic move: around 25% tariffs on most Canadian and Mexican imports, about 10% on Canadian energy, plus 10% on a wide set of goods from China. And he doesn't use normal trade law. He reaches for something much more explosive: the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA. IEEPA is a law from 1977 that was meant for things like sanctioning hostile regimes, freezing foreign assets, blocking transactions in a real national emergency. Every president since Carter has used it, but mainly for financial sanctions, not for rewriting tariff schedules on allies. Trump says, illegal drugs, especially fentanyl, and illegal immigration from Canada and Mexico are an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security. He declares an economic emergency and then uses that emergency to justify these broad tariffs under IEEPA. On paper, it looks simple. Canada sends goods. U.S. border slaps on Trump's extra tariff. Money flows into U.S. coffers. But there's a huge problem. Nobody is sure IEEPA was ever supposed to allow this. That's what dragged this whole thing to the Supreme Court. Enter the case with the very friendly name, Learning Resources versus Trump, combined with Trump vs. VOS selections. Behind those boring titles is a simple question. Can the president use IEEPA to slap broad tariffs on imports from countries like Canada? Or is that an illegal power grab from Congress? Two lower courts already said, nope, this goes too far. In D.C. federal court, Judge Rudolph Contreras ruled in May 2025 that Trump's tariffs were unlawful and violated Congress's exclusive power over taxation and trade. But he put his ruling on hold while the appeals played out. At the Court of International Trade, a three-judge panel in VOS selections versus Trump said IEEPA does not give the president this kind of open-ended tariff power. And if it did, that would likely be an unconstitutional delegation. The Trump administration appealed, and the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. On November 5, 2025, the justices spent over 2 hours grilling the government's lawyer. And here's what's crucial. Both liberal and conservative justices sounded skeptical. You had questions like, if we say this is okay, what can't a president do under IEEPA? Are we basically letting the White House impose tariffs on anyone at any time, for any reason? They brought up the major questions doctrine, which says if a president wants to do something huge and economically massive like redesign global tariffs, Congress has to speak very clearly. IEEPA never even uses the word tariff. So the court is staring at this and thinking, Did Congress really mean to give presidents a secret superpower to tax imports from Canada by just saying emergency? That's Tariff Judgment Day. Now, while the lawyers argue, something else is happening in the background. The money keeps flowing. Since February, importers in the U.S. have been paying Trump's IEEPA tariffs on goods from Canada, Mexico, China, and others, on top of normal MFN duties with effective rates ranging in some cases from about 10% up to over 30 to 40% depending on the product and country. Some analysts estimate that tens of billions of dollars in these tariffs have already been collected. And Trump himself has warned that if the court strikes them down, it could cost trillions to unwind across all countries and years. Here's the key detail most viewers never hear. Even if the Supreme Court says the tariffs were illegal, importers don't automatically get their money back. Why? Because of a boring process called liquidation. When you bring goods into the U.S., Customs eventually liquidates those entries, basically finalizes them. Once that happens, it's much harder to go back later and say, actually, that charge was invalid, give me a refund. So if you're a big importer looking at this Supreme Court case and thinking, if Trump loses, I want my money, you have to sue now and freeze your rights before Customs locks everything in. That's where Costco comes in. On December 1st, Reuters reports that Costco has filed suit against the U.S. government in the Court of International Trade. They're not just complaining on principle. They're doing something very specific, naming the United States Customs and Border Protection and top officials as defendants, challenging Trump's IEEPA tariff orders, and explicitly saying, if the Supreme Court knocks these tariffs down, Costco wants to be in line for refunds. Costco's problem is clear. It sources a huge amount of merchandise globally, including from Canada and China. Those goods got hit by Trump's emergency tariffs. Customs liquidation deadlines are approaching. If they don't get a case on file in time, billions in duties could be gone forever. And they're not alone. Trade law firms are openly advising importers, file your own CIT case now, or you might miss your chance at refunds if the Supreme Court rules against Trump. So behind the scenes, you have this lawsuit wave building. Big brands, small importers, industry groups, all scrambling to claim their piece of any future refund jackpot. For Canada, that's huge. Because every American company that sues is effectively saying, we think there's a real chance these tariffs go down. So what happens to Trump's Canada tariffs if the Supreme Court actually pulls the trigger and says, IEEPA does not authorize this kind of tariff power? Let's walk through what that means, specifically for the Canada part of the story. Trump's emergency tariffs on Canada were justified under IEEPA, tied to a declared emergency over fentanyl and illegal immigration, layered on top of existing trade arrangements like USMCA. If the court says IEEPA does not allow broad import tariffs in this way, or if it does, then IEEPA itself is an unconstitutional delegation of Congress's trade and tax power, then the legal foundation for Trump's Canada tariffs disappears. Those extra import charges on Canadian goods become, in theory, invalid. Courts below will have to decide how to unwind them, who gets refunds, how far back, and under what rules. For Ottawa, that would be a political earthquake. On one hand, Carney could go on TV and say, we told you this was an abuse of emergency powers. The U.S. system agreed, Canada stood firm, and we were right. On the other hand, this wouldn't be a clean victory, because from America's perspective, it would look like a Supreme Court decision triggering massive refund liabilities with businesses scrambling for payouts, and Trump raging that the court had destroyed his ability to defend U.S. workers with tariffs. That's not a calm environment for rebuilding trust. It's chaos. And chaos is exactly what border economies hate. Let's be precise and look at the three scenarios Canada has to prepare for. Scenario 1. The Big Strike Down. The Supreme Court rules that IEEPA does not authorize Trump's tariffs, and/or using it this way violates the Constitution's separation of powers. Result? Trump's emergency tariffs on Canada, Mexico, China, others are legally dead, at least in their current form. Importers with lawsuits, Costco and many others, start to lining up for refunds. The administration has to decide whether to ask Congress for new explicit tariff powers, which would be a huge political fight. For Canada, short-term relief. The extra tariff layer comes off. Some Canadian exporters might even benefit indirectly if their U.S. customers win refunds. Long-term uncertainty. Trump will demand that Congress fix this, and you could see new, more targeted tariffs built on a different legal basis. In other words, you might win today's battle, but not the war. Scenario 2, a narrow technical ruling. Here the court dodges the big question and goes narrow. It might say something like, some of these orders were procedurally flawed, or specific aspects of the Liberation Day tariffs go too far, without fully nuking the broader IEEPA strategy. Result, Trump keeps a version of his emergency tariff weapon, but importers still get enough legal ammunition to win individual cases and claw back money where processes weren't followed properly. For Canada, the tariff wall stays up, maybe with adjustments, but the cost and legal risk of keeping it up climbs because every importer now has a roadmap to sue. That doesn't give Ottawa the clean political win it wants, but over time it makes Trump's strategy less sustainable. Scenario 3, Trump wins big. This is the nightmare for importers and for Canada. If the court says, yes, IEEPA covers these tariffs, and no, we're not going to strike the statute down, then Trump walks away with a Supreme Court certified emergency tariff gun. Future presidents, Democrat or Republican, can copy-paste this approach anytime they declare an unusual and extraordinary economic threat. Lawsuits like Costco's become much harder to win on the basic legality question. For Canada, the message is brutal. Don't ever build your economy around the assumption that the U.S. will not weaponize emergency powers against you. Carney's push to diversify, pipelines to Asia, trade deals with Europe, joining EU defense funds, becomes not just smart strategy but survival doctrine. In that world, Tariff Judgment Day doesn't save Canada, it locks in the new normal. So is the Supreme Court about to erase Trump's Canada tariffs? We don't know yet, but we do know a few things. The justices, including conservatives, openly questioned the legality of using IEEPA this way. Legal analysts expect a decision soon, likely by the end of this year or early next. Importers are acting like there's a real shot the tariffs fall. Hence the lawsuit wave from Costco and others filing just in time to preserve refund rights. For Canada, the smart move is to treat all three scenarios as real. Prepare to capitalize if the tariffs are struck down. Prepare to adapt if they're weakened but survive. And absolutely prepare for the possibility that they're fully blessed by the court. Because once a presidential power like this is confirmed at the Supreme Court, it almost never goes back in the box. So I'll leave you with this. When that ruling drops, do you think it will be remembered as the day the Supreme Court saved America's constitutional balance and took away Trump's tariff hammer? Or the day it quietly signed off on a future where any president can wake up, declare an emergency, and tax imports from Canada at will? And if you were sitting in Ottawa right now, would you be betting on legal salvation from Washington? Or doubling down on building a world where one day, U.S. tariffs just don't matter as much? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you want to stay ahead of Tariff Judgment Day and everything that comes after, check out our other videos here on Huge Press Room, Costco versus Trump. Is a warehouse giant about to kill his Canada tariffs? Carney's new playbook, 3 ways, Canada is outsmarting Trump in the trade war from best friend to 51st state. How Trump drove U.S.-Canada relations to rock bottom. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the moment the ruling drops and the fallout that's coming next. Thanks for watching Huge Press Room. I'll see you in the next one.